Several of Barrie's essays suggest that he envisions the stories of Matt Feltner, Wheeler Catlett and Andy Catlett, Jaber Crow, and Nathan and Hannah Coulter within an even longer succession of returns found in what he simply calls our literature. The ancient stories, which form our inheritance and to which we belong. In the work of Local Culture, an essay written about the same time as Remembering, Barrie points out a few of the landmarks in this once continuous sequence of returns, broken only in the past 200 years or so with the birth of the industrial age and of romantic individualism. He understands these stories of return, such as the prodigal sons, as part of what he calls the old norm. For thousands of years, civilization had honored as normal the return home and the longing to be surrounded by one's children and grandchildren. The wanderer and exile desired to see his home and his family once again. Barrie hears the unmistakable voice of the old norm in a verse from Psalm 128. "Thou shalt see thy children's children, and peace upon Israel." The Old Testament patriarch Jacob, prefiguring the prodigal son, quote, errs, wanders, returns, is forgiven, and takes his place in the family lineage. Words that in turn perfectly describe Andy Catlett's own journey of redemption. Barrie hears the old norm speaking again in Homer's depiction of Odysseus, a wanderer reunited with his son who longs to return to his father and his wife, his household and his kingdom. 2,000 years later, the poet Dante, embellishing the tale of Odysseus, damns him to an eternity in hell among the evil counselors for sailing off with his crew on a new adventure. In the old norm, persisting over millennia, the endlessly questing adventurer threatens to sever every tie that makes life in a community possible. Barrie finds the old norm enduring down to about the year 1800 in William Wordsworth's poem, Michael, of that year. The story of a shepherd and his wife who send their son to the city to work in order to clear a claim against their land. The son is meant to return and inherit his ancestral land. For the poet Wordsworth, Barrie writes, that return is still understood as the norm. But in this case, it never happens. This longing is still there, but the economic reality of the industrial age has torn the family apart. Barrie calls this poem, quote, a sort of cultural watershed. It carries on the theme of return that goes back to the beginning of Western culture, but that return now is only a desire and a memory. In the poem, it fails to happen. Tennyson's poem, Ulysses, takes the next step by subverting the desire and helping to obliterate the memory of return. Here, Barrie writes later in the book Life is a Miracle, which I strongly urge you to read. He writes here that a new longing takes over as the dominant cultural norm. Where Dante once condemned Odysseus, or Ulysses, for his restlessness, Tennyson launches a self-indulgent, impulsive Ulysses on a romantic quest toward an ever-receding horizon. This new Ulysses appeals to the perpetual adolescence of the new age. He knows no boundaries, no limits to his appetite, and sacrifices home and family and peace and order for the sake of a future that never arrives. The anxiety once possible in a poem such as Michael, by its contrast to modernity's endless pioneering, startles us, with Barrie's help, into the recognition of what we have lost. And by now, the transformation of the ancient story is nearly complete, Barrie writes. Our society, on the whole, has forgotten or repudiated the theme of return. Young people still grow up in rural families and go off to the cities, not to return. But now it is felt that this is what they should do. Now the norm is to leave and not return. The Port William membership struggles generation after generation to keep the pattern of succession alive. Any break in the succession damages the community. whether that break is brought on by mobilization for global war, or by industrialization, or by advertisers promising a better life somewhere else. Through the membership stories, Berry makes the old norm visible again to a distracted America that knows only mobility, transience, and the most superficial sort of material progress. His characters never find authenticity and shallow self-fulfillment by leaving their spouses, families, homes, and communities. They come to know who they are by remaining faithful to things larger and older and more important than themselves. They live their lives according to, in Berry's words, the logic of vocation, and not according to the logic of success. They heed the call of family and place. Berry manages to make goodness and simplicity and ordinary life attractive in these characters. And he does so without ever idealizing Port William. This is often what he's accused of. He's accused of a hopeless, nostalgic romanticism. But suffering and death, disappointment and despair are real and ever present in his world. Port William knows fire and flood, suicide and murder. Berry is sensitive to loss and widens the horizon of that loss. Indeed, his ability to make loss visible may be one of his greatest gifts as an artist. The costs of world wars, economic consolidation, mass media, and the faceless bureaucracy haunt his novels. But to these more obvious culprits, he adds another institution that few at first would suspect: the whole modern educational establishment from grade school to graduate school. War may carry off young men. Agribusiness may radically reduce the need for farm laborers. But modern schools uproot children in their own more subtle ways and from the inside out. The child is not educated to return home and to be of use to the place and community, Berry writes. He or she is educated to leave home and earn money in a provisional future that has nothing to do with place or community.